Our third reader is Frank Romano, who's here from, where is he from? He's from Paris, from California, from Israel, the West Bank. He teaches in Paris in the Sorbonne. He's an assistant professor. I first heard him at the Green Pavilion in Brooklyn about a year and a half ago, and was so impressed with him. He teaches, he practices law in France and in the United States. He's involved in peace activities in Israel and in the West Bank with Jews, Muslims, and Christians. He has a book of poetry, a book about the Middle East called Love and Terror in the Middle East, and it's going to be republished by Alan Baxter, and his book of poetry, Crossing Over, is also going to be republished by Alan. Let me introduce, I'm very honored to introduce Frank Romano as our honored poet.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you, public. Thank you, Diane, for being here and inviting me. I initially was going to share with you some of the poems I'd written, but I just a week ago got back from Israel and Palestine, and so much emotion inspired me to share a piece with you. I was in Israel during Sukkot and Yom Kippur with my Jewish friends, and then into Ramallah and Jenin with my Muslim friends, praying with them in the mosque, and after I got back, praying with my mother in the Christian church on the West Coast, but leaving religion out. It hit the mainstream news. A week ago, the New York Times picked it up, what happened in Jenin, in the refugee camp. And this is not the political thing, it really is what happened at the end. If we can't ignore some of the politics, we'll get through it a little bit, and then something magical happened, which was the reason why I was there, to help organize dialogues, marches, more for freedom, because you really can't have peace without freedom, but it goes on both sides. I don't privilege either side because the walls create two prisoners. So what happened was I had a big dialogue and a march in Jenin, but that night, unfortunately, Israeli soldiers came in and they suspected someone was engaged in terrorist activities. I did a defensive measure, killed a Palestinian in the camp, the same camp where I was. The next day I was in the middle of a riot. You hear stories from each side. You don't know, the state of Israel. Well, this Israeli soldier said, look, we were defending ourselves. We were shot at first. I don't know who's right and who's wrong, but something magical came from all this, believe it or not. And this is the key to the grassroots efforts, which I'm passionate about and very much involved. Here's the piece. Did you gun me down in the camps tonight? 4 thin shadows bedded under the stars. An explosion shook the whistled timbers of the overgrown hut, and the helmet shouts wake up, bang, and a kid went down. Did you gun me down? The next day I watched on the sidewalk a wild, circular, red-eyed mob. Circled the town, circling the block, invading the street, hordes, some carrying Islamic Jihad flags, some shooting off AK-47s into the sweltering heat. Others broke statues and rammed their fists into shop windows. The police had disappeared, avoiding clashes, I was told. The boys came back, hundreds of them, from the refugee camp. Tires were ignited, dirty rubber infused the air, my torrid veins. Did you gun me down? Then something so strange happened. Something magical. The chaotic, frenzied mob turned the corner as about 50 boys pointed at me, standing on the sidewalk. Started walking, then running towards me. Will you crush me down? Too late to pray, too shocked to pray. I wondered, but I knew that an unbridled mob could do anything. Tight lips, then smiles, and then they seemed to lift their thumbs in unison. I I was surrounded by kids reaching out to shake my hand. I shook them, dumbfounded. I was standing next to the governor's assistant, who the boys totally ignored. I don't get it! Then, as if a horn had called them, they returned, almost running backwards, retreating back to the hordes, the massive hordes turning around and around this city of Jenin. Why didn't you crush me down? Something had happened that day. Your eyes told me, flaming red eyes, somehow tempered when they settled on mine. They told me. They told me. The next, I changed the order, and I don't even find my place. It's called Drone. The face-off. Two got up. Face-off. No more. Now push a button, time explodes. No inquiry. No. You're not shielded by constitutional rights anymore. Don't fret. But you're trembling with frustration. You're looking frenzied, feathers ruffled in all four corners. Wipe away your tears. Wipe them. Come on. Your phone's bugged. No more leaders. Just shells. Politicians. Like drones. No eye-to-eye compassion. No heartbeat inside. Okay. 8 minutes. Now, just changing gears, folks. Last summer, I happened to be home. And my home is Ashland, Oregon, with my mother and my kids. And my mother, 94 years old, God bless her.
Wow. Congratulations.
We pulled her from the grips of death a couple of times. She was that close. And due to her strength and, I guess, support and who knows what else, she came through. So this is called My Razor's Edge, because I thought thinking of suicide was a sin. But what about if you dream it? Sat by you. Now this part is true, and the rest is the dream. At home, your blue eyes and my worried brown eyes. You smiled, your courage stressed your dry lips. Before she went to sleep, I put her around my head. I put her arm around my head. She leaned her head over to me and said, "Frankie, don't leave me. Don't leave me. Mom, I won't leave you. I'll always be with you forever and ever." The corners of her tired mouth bent upwards as she repeated, "We'll be together forever and ever, and we'll be together. Yes, Mom, forever." And she was gone in muffled snores. Now the dream. Days later, this is word for word dream. Mom was in a hospital surrounded by rugged mountains to the west of Oregon. You know how rugged and raw those mountains are. Almost overlooking the steep cliffs of that crashing surf. I was driving Victoria, my 9-year-old. She came all the way from Paris to see her grandma. I was bringing her. As the car climbed a narrow road near Cave Junction, a gray plateau of solid rock loomed before us, and we both had the same idea. Let's scale it. Stop the car. In the back, we wound upwards in a gradual curve. I headed first. Victoria flowed to the right. Rattling! Minutes later, a shrilled scream curdled to my soul. I flew to her side to see blood streaming down her face and a red spot on her forehead as a wily gray snake slithered between the rocks above. I grabbed my screaming child as I cried. I had to suck the poison. She pushed me away. I held fast my mouth over the wound as she bellowed profusely. After spitting several mouths of blood slimed with poison, my baby was silent. She was unconscious. I held her, I slid her down the side of the rock, my rear scraping, didn't feel it, and I flew to the car. I was an hour drive before I got to the hospital, the same hospital where my mother lay. I stayed with her the rest of the day and night, only leaving her for a couple of minutes to climb upstairs and tell my mom that we'll soon be with her and Victoria was just a little sick. In the morning, she was declared brain dead. I looked to her calm face, golden strands of hair sticking to her slightly olive skin beneath the tubes. After visiting my mother, who was pale, laying there with oxygen clamped to her nose, she still could smile, but her aura was drifting. I took a hotel room because the doggone hospital rules were kin can't stay, even in situations like that, believe it or not. So I took one of these wayside motels. A sign was drooping over the dry, gray sky. The next day, I spent the whole day shuttling from one room to the other, caresses holding hands. I went downstairs to drink a cup of coffee and think. Then I returned to Victoria's room. Late that night, as the changing of the guard, I noticed they were inattentive. I decided to take my loving family from me on a trip. I snuck back to Mom's room when the nurses were on break. I put the light on and Mom's eyes opened. She nodded as I disconnected all the machines. She knew. I gathered her in my arms. I lifted her up. Reaching her, I coaxed her into the wheelchair and took her to the car. I returned, climbed up the stairs to Victoria's room. I appeared in the hall. Nobody stirred. I returned to my baby. I began unplugging all the life support machines and disconnecting the tubes, the wires, and all that. I kissed my little one. Her lungs lunged and receded. And still, I gathered her into my arms, holding back my shaking body. The torrent, as I coughed, muffled, slunk around, tiptoed around the stairs, out the door. I laid her on the back seat. I drove my two loves. The northwestern wind blew through the open windows. As I held my mom's hand, I told her Victoria was sleeping in the back, but soon would rise, and give her a big hug and a big kiss. "What's wrong, Frankie?" "Just tired, Mom. I love you." "I love you too." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her slump into the chair, and she was gone. My body trembled. I jammed my finger between my teeth. I opened the window. I couldn't breathe. I stopped the car. Looking straight ahead. Couldn't look. We arrived at the hotel 20 minutes later. I sat in between the beds, holding their hands, gushing, somehow fell asleep, only to yank my head up. Hearing the piercing wail of distant sirens. The sirens looked out the window to see two police cars with Christmas lights whirling, sirens bellowing, piercing the crisp Oregon night. I gave my mom and baby girl one last long kiss and slipped out the back door and walked toward the steep, raw, rugged, gritty, towering, soaring vampire cliffs in the darkness in the night of a raw northwestern evening, and could see the glint of fearsome, unbridled breakers foaming over the freezing sea, white foam of restless, swirling sea crashing below. I walked out the farthest cliff. I looked as my pounding heart masked the sound of waves, but the salt air whisking in, bringing in the distant crashing, reminded me they were there, out there somewhere, in the edge of a low drone of a monstrous sea, in the blackness. I looked one last time to the window of the room, way back, lit up where my loved ones lay, the cracking of the door below the police hammers, and then stepped out on the ledge. I stepped out on the ledge, and then launched my eagle frame into the black arms, and mysteriously, magically, time froze. As I cut through the thick, billowy arms of the cold wind, I saw a stage, lit up before me, Victoria before me, singing in the rain, her red lips opening in an ecstatic smile before an enlightened crowd, her contagious smile. I dropped more into the blackness, until time froze again, in a time warp. I saw a beach lit up in the distance. It was the Miramar beach near the Riviera, where I sat next to my mother for hours hand in hand, in cocktails, and dreaming, sipping cocktails, resting, dreaming together. And then the words came back. They came back. "You'll be with me forever and ever. You'll be with me for